On October 7, 1917, in Dornach, Switzerland, Rudolf Steiner gave a lecture as part of a series of 14 called The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness. In lecture number 5, he told his audience that the time will come when it is pathological for people to even think in terms of spirit and soul. Sound people will speak of nothing but the body. It will be considered a sign of illness for anyone to arrive at the idea of any such thing as a spirit or a soul. People who think like that will be considered to be sick, and you can be quite sure of it. A medicine will be found for this. The soul will be made non-existent with the aid of a drug. Taking a sound point of view, people will invent a vaccine to influence the organism as soon as possible, preferably as soon as it is born, so that this human body never even gets the idea that there is a soul and a spirit. The end result is that all their lives, people will believe only in the physical world they perceive with their senses. The heirs of modern materialism will look for the vaccine to make the body healthy. That is, make its constitution such that this body no longer talks of such rubbish as soul and spirit, but takes a sound view of the forces which live in engines and in chemistry, and let planets and suns arrive from nebula in the cosmos. Materialistic physicians will be asked to drive the souls out of humanity. Steiner went on to found a movement and a philosophy known as Anthroposophy. Anthroposophy literally implies wisdom about man. This philosophy is based on the idea that humans can contact spiritual worlds through the intellect. Steiner taught that the intellect can be utilized by humans to think and reflect and observe the inner self, and meditation and concentration are the methods that are used to further this goal. Anthroposophic medicine was founded in the early 1920s by Rudolf Steiner and Ida Wegman. Anthroposophic medicine views the physician as a healing, empathic, and therapeutic force. These doctors acknowledge and address the spiritual nature of the patient as well as the physical body. They receive special training that develops their skills in this area, and they view the patient as a whole being. The norm in conventional medicine is the quick and routine approach. Unfortunately, this approach is becoming ever more prevalent in our society as the practice of medicine in many ways has devolved into a business. Doctors are pressured to see as many patients as possible and are not able to spend time that would be required to address issues outside of the physical realm. Anthroposophic medicine is practiced in 78 countries around the world, and patients in general report a high level of satisfaction with it compared to conventional healthcare. It addresses many different types of health issues, including family medicine, chronic disease, childhood disease, and palliative care, and it's usually administered in combination with mainstream medicine. Some of the medicines anthroposophic doctors use include those made from herbs, minerals, and animals. The doctors who work in this field are trained at accredited schools. All anthroposophic physicians must be fully trained and licensed in conventional medicine. However, additional training seeks to expand the art of healing by spiritual knowledge of the human being. It emphasizes spiritual development and places a focus on holistic health because the health of the body and spirit are deeply interconnected. It is important to note that Steiner describes the human being as composed of 4 different elements: a physical body, which is made up of materialist substances, an etheric or life body, an astral or soul body, and an ego, self-aware spiritual being, which carries our spiritual individuality from one life to the next. While both humans and animals have an astral body, humans alone possess the ego, which is the center of our being. This is what sets humans apart from the animal kingdom. All 4 of these parts work together to shape what we are, and they are connected with one another. The physical principle brings about the bones and muscles of the human being, while the organs of growth, reproduction, and digestion, for example, are acted upon by the etheric or life body. The astral body creates the nervous system, which goes all the way up to the brain. The ego is in charge of the circulation of the blood. From this, we are able to see that the four members compose the human organism. The understanding of the whole human being, a being that is traversing a spiritual path, is what is missing from modern Western medicine. At the physical matter level of the human being is the physical body. The properties of this principle are physical and chemical properties and structures, mechanics, chemical reactions, states of matter, and inorganic forms. The next level of the human being is the etheric body, or life. The emergent properties are growth, reproduction, development, metabolism, anabolism, nutrition, self-healing, self-defense, vitality, sense of well-being, living forms, lymph and microscopic blood movement as well. At the third level is the soul, which emerges from the astral body. The properties of the soul are consciousness, sensation, pain, emotions, desires, lusts, instincts, reflexes, intentions, a source of self-propelling motion, catabolism, internal organ development, characteristic anatomy and physiology, and cellular respiration. Anthroposophic medicine applies this fourfold view of the human being to human health and illness. According to Steiner, an imbalance between the four factors is what leads to disease. If these can be corrected and brought back into a state of harmony, it is possible to reverse disease states. The symptoms of disease are manifestations of the human organism fighting back against imbalance in the system. Systems are not suppressed unless the life of the patient is in danger. Instead, natural remedies are administered with the goal of regaining balance and overcoming illness. Three major functioning organic systems form another aspect of the human being. Anthroposophic medicine stresses the need to work on healing these systems, and they include the nerve sense system, the rhythmic system, and the metabolic limb system. This is what Steiner has to say about these three systems. The nerve sense system is to be pictured as localized mainly in the head, though of course this head organization really extends over the entire human being. The nervous and sensory functions of the skin, and also those within the human organization, must be included. However, we cannot arrive at a well-founded conception of the modes of activity in the human organism unless we differentiate, theoretically to begin with, the nerve sense system from the rest of the organization as a whole. The second system in the human being, the rhythmic system, includes in the functional sense everything that is subject to rhythm, primarily, therefore, the breathing system and its connection with the system of blood circulation. In the wider sense, too, there are rhythms that are of essential significance to the human being, although these can be disrupted in many ways. I am referring to the rhythms of day and night, of sleeping and waking, as well as everything else rhythmical, the rhythmic assimilation of food, and so on. These latter rhythms are constantly disrupted by the human being, but the consequences of such disturbances have to be brought into equilibrium by certain regulatory factors found in the organism. As a second member of the human organization, then, we have the rhythmic human being, and as a third member, the metabolic organism, in which I include the limb organism, because the functional processes that arise as a result of the movement of the limbs are inwardly connected with the metabolism in general. In a lecture titled, "How Are We to Understand Illness and Death?" Steiner lays out his theory of how the physical principle works in the human organism. He says that the process begins with birth and continues until the change of teeth occurs in children. Around the age of 7, a child pushes a shell away from itself, and here Steiner is talking about the change of teeth. At that time, something is also taking place within the spiritual life of the child, and Steiner says the human being is born a second time. Until the 7th year, the etheric body lies latent in the physical body. This is how Steiner describes this important milestone. The etheric body is like a match set on fire around the time of the change of teeth. It is bound in the physical body and now comes out for its own free, independent activity. And the sign by which this free activity of the etheric body is announced is precisely the change of teeth. The change of teeth is very significant for those who look deeper into the nature of the human being. If we have a human being before us up to the 7th year, the physical principle works freely in the physical body, but the etheric and astral principles are bound and not yet born out of their spiritual shells. After age 7, the etheric body becomes free and now works on the physical body until the time of sexual maturity, and then the outer astral sheath is pushed away. Astrally, the human being is born for the 3rd time at sexual maturity. The active forces that were bound within the etheric body now produce the faculty of sexual maturity, reproduction, and the organs associated with these functions. The etheric body, the growth principle, has been freed. It creates the strongest concentration of the drives and desires of the physical nature. After this takes place, the astral body, the envelopment of the ego, is free, and the ego then works on the astral body. The astral body is made up of 2 parts, one that comes from its original disposition and one that the ego gives birth to. Reincarnation and the belief in karma is an important facet of anthroposophy. Anthroposophy holds that the soul of the human being is immortal and passes through successive lives on earth while incarnated in a physical body. Each lifetime lays a karmic foundation for the next. When the human being is born, they bring with them 4 bodies divided from each other, which are the fruits and results of previous lives. These are there as a measure of the energy and power in their life. Since the purpose of life on earth is the furthering of spiritual progression, we plan our circumstances of the next birth in the time between lives. We may choose an illness or disease in the next lifetime as an opportunity to deal with karma accumulated from previous incarnations. Illness of the physical body may be a message from higher self that there is an issue from a previous lifetime needing to be resolved. Anthroposophy theorizes that during the early childhood years, soul spiritual forces permeate the organism, which unleashes an organizing effect involving growth. With the change of teeth, these forces are changed into something soul spiritual, into the force of memory, into the thought-forming force. If the transformation of these forces is too weak, then the organizing forces remain and may create new formations which become illnesses later in life. Steiner says that childhood illnesses come about from the opposite tendency. There's too much of the organizing force during childhood. These forces need to be dealt with karmically. And this is where anthroposophy has a radically different viewpoint on what causes common childhood illness. Conventional medicine sees childhood illnesses as inherently bad and seeks to prevent them via vaccination. Anthroposophy, on the other hand, views them as a necessary instrument in dealing with karma and incarnation of the child. Practitioners of this type of medicine utilize medical remedies designed to help the child deal with the illness not only as a disease affecting their physical body, but also for spiritual development and progression of the soul. Consider the phenomenon of childhood illnesses that have fever as a symptom. From the spiritual perspective of anthroposophy, these are considered to be possible positive events which occur to help the child to incarnate in his or her physical body. To the developing child, the physical body is in some sense a foreign entity, and it is through disease that the child, through adaptation, makes the physical vehicle a home for that child's individual soul. This viewpoint sees childhood illness as a kind of regulatory force, and this is why these illnesses generally appear during childhood. Adults sometimes develop these diseases too, but anthroposophy has a different theory on why this happens. Childhood diseases help bring about balance and counteract what Anthroposophical medicine calls premature hardening, which is a negative thing because it is associated with Ahriman. Since fever is seen as luciferic, an opposing force to anything Ahrimanic, early vaccination in children deprives them of an opportunity for assistance in the incarnation process, especially if it takes place before the first 7-year cycle of the child has ended. This is because the first 7 years are characterized by hardening of the organism, which takes place at the change of teeth. From a spiritual viewpoint, this is seen as significant. This does not mean, however, that we should abandon all modern medicine. Steiner says we must work toward a balance as we connect with the spiritual realities around us. If we are armed with a proper spiritual education, we can open the doors to many kinds of alternative therapies. He advocates working in conjunction with the use of conventional drugs and interventions. Another factor of anthroposophic medicine is supporting a patient's own healing capabilities. At a lecture on June 4, 1921, Steiner was asked, "What is Anthroposophy's view of vaccination as a means of protection against epidemics?" He said, "In some cases, it can be shown that a certain success, such as that has to be achieved through vaccination, for example, against smallpox, has actually been achieved. The fact remains that infectious diseases have been largely reduced by more external, more hygienic measures, which have, of course, become necessary, and by protective vaccination. Admittedly, numerous vaccinations were not such that one could say that they had a similar success for other diseases, but one must certainly admit the effectiveness of this principle. On the other hand, however, this question is something that can be viewed more psychologically. Today, there are very many opponents of vaccination. These opponents of vaccination are actually parties whose psychology cannot be approached rationally. They are people who, out of an inner reluctance, act against the way in which it is attempted to work, and they cannot say out of their realization that the vaccination methods are ineffective because there are effects, and anyone who resists is resisting these vaccination methods out of a certain unconsciousness. Anthroposophy must start from deeper points of view. If you think about the nature of illness together with what has been explained to you here today, namely about repeated earthly lives, if you are convinced that there are repeated earthly lives, then you must also bring together what a person experiences in the case of illness in the present life with what he has experienced in a previous earthly life. When one is willing to see this, when one has the will to see this, regardless of what epidemiology has to say in the science of infection, regardless of that, one must know that there is a certain connection between what a person has been through in a previous life and what happens when he is now exposed to a particular infection. It is said that something happens by chance, but it is not admitted that man is driven there from the subconscious, where he then comes into contact with the infection story. Regardless of some of what he may experience as a result, one can still come to many other views of what is connected with an illness. When it is realized that certain illnesses have something to do with the peculiarities of the soul of the person, that in a certain respect they are an overcoming of what the person could not achieve in a previous life on earth, and that these physical disease processes, which one must endure, are a form of compensation. The disease process is also linked to psychological phenomena. Then one can also understand why, out of a certain unconsciousness, instinct, some have an aversion to this healing elixir. They actually unconsciously say to themselves that with what is present as illness, an inner soul development upwards to the spirit should go parallel with the outer healing. And if the vaccination that is used makes it possible for things to succeed completely as one imagines, one would still have to say, even if one manages through appropriate procedures to extinguish all epidemics, that one limits the illnesses. But the question still arises as to whether something else is not also necessary, which must, so to speak, accommodate this process by simultaneously promoting an inner spiritual development. People should realize that such a procedure is possible. One can acknowledge everything that science says, but one must be clear about the necessity that, in addition to the external healing methods that are available, there must also be something that helps the soul to progress inwardly, and that points to earlier spiritual connections, to earlier lives. Anthroposophy will never object to what science brings. At a meeting with practicing physicians on April 22, 1924, Steiner was again asked what spiritual science has to say about vaccination, specifically with regard to smallpox. Here is part of what he said in response. It can be said that the risk of infection is extremely high when suffering from smallpox. However, one should not be so careless as to always think of physical mediation in the transmission, but rather that the psychological predispositions are particularly strong in the case of smallpox. Proof of this could be that one can protect oneself very well if one is able to shut oneself out away in the right way. I am able to speak about this because once, as a 22-year-old person, I need not mention the circumstances, I taught a pupil whose mother was lying with black smallpox right next to it, separated only by a screen from the room in which I was giving my lessons. I did nothing about it, continued the lessons the whole time until the mother recovered. But I did it quite willingly, especially to see how one can protect oneself when one absolutely takes the smallpox patient, including those suffering from black smallpox, quite objectively like another object, like a stone or bush, towards which one has no further feelings or fear or any other psychological strings, but takes it as an objective fact. In this case, the danger of infection must indeed be highly counteracted. Therefore, after all, the psychic factor can also play a strong role in the infection. I've never been afraid of exposing myself to the possibility of infection, and in fact, I have never been infected and have never suffered from an infectious disease. I was therefore able to determine that simply the consciousness, the strong consciousness of the existence of an illness, can be the cause of illness from the astral body. And the smallpox vaccination? That is a peculiar case. You see, if you vaccinate someone and you educate them as an anthroposophist, it does no harm. It only harms those who grow up with predominantly materialistic thoughts. In such cases, vaccination becomes a kind of Ahrimanic force. The person can no longer rise above a certain materialistic feeling. And that is exactly the most worrying thing about the smallpox vaccination, that people are virtually clothed with a phantom. The human being has a phantom that prevents him from getting rid of the soul entities as far from the physical organism as in normal consciousness. He becomes constitutionally materialistic. He can no longer rise to the spiritual. That is the worrying thing about vaccination. When asked, if the circumstances are as they are, for example, in our area, where the influence through education and so on is very difficult, how should one behave there? Steiner responded, you just have to vaccinate. There is no other way, because fanatical opposition to these things is what I, not for medical reasons, but for general anthroposophical reasons, would not recommend at all. Fanatical opposition to these things is not what we are aiming for. Instead, we want to use insight to change things on a large scale. I have always regarded this, when I was friends with doctors, as something to be combated. For example, with Dr. Ash, who absolutely did not vaccinate. I have always fought against that. Because if he does not vaccinate, someone else will. It is complete nonsense to be so fanatical in the details. To conclude this video, I'll leave you with two other quotes I found from Steiner's lectures on anthroposophic medicine and its philosophy. So it is perfectly possible to make a bridge from a knowledge of purely physical means of healing to a knowledge which works with spiritual means. Anthroposophy does not seek to correct modern medicine, but to add its own knowledge to it, because ordinary medicine makes demands upon itself only. And finally, in order to satisfy the inner needs of the human soul, there must once again be a closer bond between healing and our philosophical conception of the world. And it is this which is a knowledge of the needs of the age seek to find in the anthroposophical movement. Thanks for watching. See you next time.